We're going to be reading here in a moment verses 1 through 17. You know, when we back off and look at this, you know, there's two or three things that jumped out at me. And to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do, we're going to look at this. We're going to hover over it and kind of break these 17 verses down, get them kind of categorized. But I want to come back and explore the paradoxes that are in these 17 verses. And I've got 5 here. We're going to discuss those 5 things. And if we talk a little bit about what a paradox is, you know, I did not put my hands on a definition that to me fully described it. So I kind of combined several things. A paradox is a statement or a situation that seems to go against common sense. It seems to be impossible to accomplish, or at least very difficult to understand. But it still may be true. Okay? And that's what makes it a paradox. And we're going to, in these 17 verses, we want to look at human or humanity. We're going to look at humility. And we're going to see a little humor also in these 17 verses. So, as we go this and we look at a paradox, you guys, I wrote down 2 or 3 things here that I consider to be a paradox that I've heard, and I've used some of them in my life, and we could probably come up with hundreds of them with this group that's here, but less is more. That fits a lot of things at a lot of times now. Less is more. Drinking a lot of water sometimes makes you thirsty. Standing is more tiring than walking. Don't sound right, but many times you find it true if you have to stand in one spot too long. Let's do our reading here of Acts chapter 12, verses 1 through 17. If you will, read along with me. We're talking about Peter's arrest and deliverance. It says, "Now about that time Herod the king laid hands on some who belonged to the church in order to mistreat them. And he had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword." We know that he cut his head off. "When he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. Now it was during the days of the unleavened bread. When he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover, or this feast of the unleavened bread, to bring him out before the people." Verse 5, "So Peter was kept in the prison, but prayer for him was being made," what? Fervently. Fervently by the church of God. Verse 6, "On the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison." Verse 7, and behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell, and he struck Peter's side and woke him up, saying, "Get up quickly." And his chains fell off his hands, and the angel said to him, "Gird yourself and put on your sandals." And he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." And he went out and continued to follow, and he did not know that what was being done by the angel was real, but thought it was seeing a vision. When they had passed the first and second guard, they came to the iron gate that leads into the city, which opened for them by itself. And they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. Verse 11, "When Peter came to himself, he said, 'Now I know for sure that the Lord has sent forth his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting. And when he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who was also called Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. When he knocked at the door of the gate, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. When she recognized Peter's voice, because of her joy, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter was standing in front of the gate. They said to her, "You are out of your mind." But she kept insisting that it was so. They kept saying, "It is his angel." But Peter continued knocking, and when they had opened the door, they saw him and were amazed. Verse 17. But motioning to them with his hand to be silent, he described to them how the Lord had led him out of the prison, and he said, "Report these things to James and the brethren." Then he left and went to another place. Did you notice any paradox as we went through there? We're going to point some out. I've got this broken down if we're going to summarize what's happening here in three different sections. Verses 1 through 5. We see that it was days of the unleavened bread, or the Passover feast. The Herod that we're talking about here is the grandson of Herod the Great. Okay? It's Herod Agrippa I. And he served, he reigned from AD 41 to AD 44, approximately. He beheaded James the Apostle, brother of John. Now remembering, James is beheaded prior to Peter's arrest. So do you think Peter knew about this? Oh, certainly did. He arrested Peter after he saw how much it pleased the Jews when he beheaded James. So he had big plans for Peter, but he wanted to wait until the holiday was over. Let the Jews have their holiday, and then we'll chop Peter's head off. We need to make sure that we understand what the church was doing at this time. They were in a prayer meeting. They were praying for Peter fervently. Let's look at verses 6 through 11. Here we see Peter's rescue and escape. The angel of the Lord had to tell him what to do. Did it kind of sound like you might sound to your kid in the morning trying to get them, hustle them up and get them ready for school? Get up, put your shoes on, don't forget your coat, your cloak. Get all your stuff ready. See a little humor there? The angel having to talk to Peter like he's a child. We see Peter in a very humbling situation. He's there in chains. He is very humble at this time. He's very human. He don't know, is this a dream? Is this really happening? I don't know what's going on. He's wanting, even though the angel of the Lord reached over and kicked him in the ribs to wake him up, he needs he's looking for physical proof. Is this real? Is this real? And we see a little humor when we see the angel of the Lord talking to him like he was a youngster getting ready for school in the morning. Is it real or is it a dream? It seems impossible. It seems hard to understand, but it was true. And there the paradox lies. Verses 12 through 17, he has some questions. Where do I go? What can I do? Where am I safe? Here we're looking at the human side, humanity. He's wanting real answers. He's wanting a real place. He's wanting real help. But we also see a little humor. Where are my brothers? Might be another question that he might ask. You know, this is us many times today. If we listen to what's going on here, we can see ourselves in the same situation. Listen to the words that are here in chapter 2. We're in Acts chapter 12, verses 1 through 17. When we listen to those words, we should learn from the mistakes that was made in the first century, mistakes that we could very well make today. We probably do on a regular basis. And then make application. You know, the sad truth is that history repeats itself. The mistakes that we read about here in the first century have been repeated over and over and over. And will continue as such unless God does what the foolhardy man did in our Bible study this morning. Just do away with the devil. That'll take care of all of our temptation. You know, we have an opportunity that the first century Christians did not. We have this written word. We should be able to get in this book and study and learn and make application in our lives, we're going to make mistakes, but not to make all of the mistakes that were made then. They didn't have the Word. Now, when we look at these, and we're fixing to get into our paradox and looking at humanity and humor and humility, the church is in its infancy, has not been established very long at all. Jewish leaders were furious at these Christians as they were upending their religious dynasty. I mean, and that's what it was. They had a dynasty. And we talk sometimes, just think how hard it would be. We know what the Jewish leaders wanted to do. They wanted to kill all the Christians they could kill and destroy them. What about the Jewish Christians, new Christians? Think about how confused they were, how scared they were. The Gentiles were invited by God Himself to be a part of this church that had been established. Think about how big a blow that was to Jewish leadership. And why were they after Peter? Because he was God's vessel to accomplish His feat in establishing this church. Herod realized how much it pleased the Jews with the beheading of James, so he was waiting till after the holidays to punish Peter. And he had the same thing in mind, if not worse, for Peter. He wanted to put Christianity to bed. He wanted to destroy what these Christians had going. What happened? God answered the prayers of the Christians. He answered those prayers. We started with saying, careful what you ask for. When we ask, do you really believe? When we ask, do you have enough faith? Do you hear the knock on that door? And we are praying fervently for Peter to get out of prison. And we hear the knock on our door, and we don't even, the last thing to cross our mind, oh, that's Peter. God has answered our prayers. Here they send a lowly servant girl to answer that knock. They're not expecting Peter. Are they preparing themselves for the worst, or are they preparing themselves for God to answer their prayers that they fervently prayed? I think their actions pretty much answers that question. Humanity, and we're going to get back into our text now. Humanity and humor and humility, when I read through here, those words are interconnected, they're entangled and demonstrated all through these 17 verses. We can see human nature, we can see times of humility, and we certainly can see some humor. Paradox number 1. Look at verse 9. And he went out and continued to follow, and he did not know that what was being done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision or having a dream. He was humbled in chains in prison. He was abruptly awakened by the angel of the Lord. Yet he was human because he did not think his escape was real. Peter himself didn't. He thought this was a dream. This is not real. This is something happening that I'll wake up shortly and find that I'm still in these chains. Assuming he would know that the church was praying for him, why was he so surprised when he was released from his chains? You stop and think. He had been taken away from his brothers and sisters. He's arrested. He's in chains. He knew that they were praying for him. He knew that that's what he would be doing if one of his brothers or sisters were in that same boat. But yet Peter himself he was not expecting to be released. He was not expecting for those chains to fall off his wrist. If we, and we're going from the first century to today, if we were to actually give God the credit for all the good things that happen in our life. Now, I know we say we do, but we also think we're running our own rudder. We're guiding our own ship. I'm responsible for all these good things. That gets in our head. The humanity side of it. But if we were to actually give God the credit, that's where the credit is due, we would find it hard to believe at times, wouldn't we? Now, I'm thinking, I worked. I did this. I did that. But if we look, remember back in some of our last couple of lessons that we've had on prayer is in studying the Word, how do we pray to a God that we don't know? You say, well, I know God. Okay, how do we get to know God? There's only one way that I know of to get to know God, and that's to be in His Word. Study. That's a question I ask the kids. You pray? Oh, yeah, I pray. Okay. Do you study the Bible? No, I'm not. I feel bad. I'm not studying. Okay. Do you know God? Oh, yeah, I know God. You know, so-and-so told me about God. You know, do you know God? And the only way you're going to get to know God is being in His Word. It's connected. We've got to give God credit. Paradox number 2, verse 5 and verse 12. Verse 5 says, "So Peter was kept in the prison, but prayer for him was being made fervently by the church of God." Verse 12, let's see. "And when he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who was also called Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying." They were meeting secretly. They had to, didn't they? They'd be in the same chains that Peter was in. They were meeting behind closed doors. They were in humble mode. Now you talk about humble. If you're a Christian and you're having to hide like a common thief or a murderer, someone wanted by the law, how humbling would that be? They were in humble prayer to God on Peter's behalf, yet they were shocked when Peter showed up. Verse 16. "But Peter continued knocking, and when they had opened the door, they saw him," and what? They were amazed. Okay? Were they praying for Peter's release, or were they preparing themselves for the worst? You stop and think. James just was beheaded. As soon as the holidays are over, the same thing's ahead of Peter. You stop and think. Human nature. Okay, I'm going to pray for Peter's release. But Lord, thy will be done. And if Peter gets his head chopped off, please be with him. Be with us in our loss. You stop and think, the human side, they may have been praying more fervently to deal with whatever happened if God didn't release Peter. They may have been praying for strength to get through this, to deal with whatever happened. We've been there. We pray for those on our prayer list. We must pray with the confidence in God, faith in God. We shouldn't be praying but backing up and praying for strength for us to deal with whatever the outcome is. Did they feel that Peter was as good as dead? We limit God in our prayers many times. When we're praying for our brothers and our sisters, we need to call names. We need to address illnesses. We need to, I've got a loss for words here, buy into our prayer and believe it's being heard and that it is possible to be answered. We know that it is. I think everyone in here would testify to that. But yet our weakness in humanity keeps us from going into a fervent prayer by a righteous person and expect the positive outcome that God can give. Verse 13. When he knocked at the door of the gate, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. Okay? Peter used his human instincts. Okay? He ran for his life. Can you imagine? Now he gets out of prison, chains fall off, the angel tells him to put on his shoes, put on his cloak, get dressed. You know, come this way. The gate opens without any assistance, opens for them. They leave. And then he's kind of coming to reality. This is really happening. And then what happens? The angel's gone. Reality. This is a man running for his life. He knew very well what his future was going to hold if he remained in that prison. Where do I go? Where am I going to be safe? The church. My brothers and sisters. But when he knocked on the door, it appears that the believers were not anticipating his return. They were not. They sent the humble servant girl. This is humanity. This is us today. They sent the humble servant girl to the door, not expecting Peter at all. He wasn't even on their list of folks that might show up and be knocking on their door, evidently. If he was anywhere in the top 10, you'd think, somebody go see if that's Peter. No. Sent the servant girl. Are we guilty of praying to God but not really expecting the outcome that we desire? The outcome that we are looking for? Are we more prepared for the worst? Are we praying for strength to get through a hard time if the worst were to happen? Verse 14. When she recognized Peter's voice, because of her joy, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter was standing in front of the gate. Is that humanity? If she didn't live where she lived, I'd claim she had blonde roots. I used to tease a lot of my ball players about, you've got blonde roots. You've got to have blonde roots. Some of the stuff the kids would come up with. But here's Rhoda. She hears his voice and recognizes it. Now, you know, she's been in and been involved in this prayer meeting, and she recognizes Peter's voice, and instead of hastily opening that gate and letting him in to safety, she turns and runs away to go back and tell brothers and the sisters. Their prayer had been answered. Seems impossible. Seems hard to understand. But it's true. He was there. It is kind of humorous though, isn't it? How we as humans respond and react sometimes. I hope God sees humor in it. I hope God is able to chuckle with some of the things, decisions that we make, just like is being made here in the first century. Verse 15, in the last paradox. They said to her, "You are out of your mind. Have you gone crazy?" But she kept insisting that it was so. They kept saying, "It is his angel." Their expectation was Peter was already dead. Very human Christians didn't believe the humble little servant girl. Questioned her. They explained it away by saying that she was just You're beside yourself. If you're hearing Peter's voice and seeing an image of Peter, it's his angel. Does that sound like they had expectations of their prayers being answered? Did they even consider that God had answered their prayer just as they had asked? Was their faith so small or so little that they could not imagine? They couldn't imagine how Peter could be at their doorstep. Hard to believe, difficult to understand, but true. Humanity, humility, and humorous. We've seen all of these things repeated several times in this 17 verses. A very important story for the first century church. Just like these first century Christians, we should be humbled in the fact that we are so human. And listen, we should be humbled that we are so human that it's often humorous. And I say that just like I said a little while ago. I pray that God sees some humor in it. But we need to expect our prayers not only to be heard, but expect God to respond. Our faith should be that way. Pray fervently, just as the first century church did, but be prepared for God's answer and not surprised. We need to give God the glory and don't underestimate or don't limit His loving kindness, which we so often do. We are human, and we live in a world that pulls at us every day. We spoke about how many times we live so close to temptation that we get dull to the fact that we're being tempted. But the closer we come and stay close, the closer we come to that temptation and spend any time, the more likely we are to sin and be going to God in prayer to forgive us of our sins. That's a lesson that I've prepared this morning. And I know that as we commune with one another, we fellowship with one another, we've talked about the closeness we should have as brothers and sisters in Christ, closer than our earthly families. But do we really know where someone's heart is? Now, we study the Word to learn the heart of God. But we don't have anything to study but just being a good brother and a good sister to know when someone needs. At this time, we're going to offer an invitation. We're going to sing hymn number 262. I hope that there was something in the lesson that as you read and heard the lesson, hopefully there's some application that can be made for us to be more in tune with God instead of being more human. We would invite you, if you have a need at all, any need, we would invite you to come as we stand and sing hymn number 260.